Martin Var, Huladunya, agus Falcha. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Justice Subcommittee on Policing. This is our first meeting of 2021, and we have no apologies. Agenda item 1 is a decision to take item 3 in private, which is to review the evidence heard today. Are we all agreed, members? If you disagree, perhaps indicate by waving or in the chat box. We seem to have agreement on that. Thank you very much indeed. Our main item of business today is an evidence session on Police Scotland's use of remote piloted aircraft systems, more commonly known as drones, and body-worn cameras. I refer members to paper 1, which is a note by the clerk, and paper 2, which is a private paper. And I welcome our witnesses to the meeting today: Assistant Chief Constable Mark Williams, Operational Support, and Chief Superintendent Matthew Richards, Digitally Enabled Policing Project, Police Scotland, and Mr Barry Sillars, Deputy Chief Executive, Strategy and Performance at the Scottish Police Authority. And I thank the witnesses, indeed all those who provided written evidence to the committee, which as always is very helpful. And before we move to questions, can I remind members to indicate who their question is for, and remind all attendees to wait just a moment for your microphone to be activated before speaking. Now, I have the first couple of questions, and I'll be followed by Shona. And my question is to Mr Williams, thereafter to Mr Sillars, please. In your written evidence, you state that a number of assessments have been undertaken in relation to data protection, privacy and equality impacts with regard to the acquisition and use of emerging technologies. Could you outline for the subcommittee those assessments which have taken place in relation to drones and body-worn cameras, please?
Yes, thank you, Convener. I'm very happy to do so. There's 2 specific assessments that you've mentioned there already that took place on receipt of the drones and have been updated and reviewed on an annual basis since then. First of all, the EQHRIA, the Equalities and Human Rights Impact Assessment, which is in place, and also the Data Protection Impact Assessment, which is also in place. Both have been in place since prior to the operational deployment of the drones themselves, and as I say, they're updated every year. In fact, they're due to be updated in February and April of this year, respectively, again, as a result of the 12-month time frame being arrived at. So both are in place, and both are actively reviewed and updated based on any relevant changes that should be recorded.
Thank you. Could you comment, please, Mr Sillars?
Certainly, thanks for the question. I can confirm that as part of the SPA's, at the time, the Strategy, Policy and Performance Committee, when it considered the use of RPAS on its meeting in May 2019, we were actually in the SPA cited on a privacy assessment, an EQHRIA, and also a data protection assessment. So that formed part of that committee's deliberation of the use of RPAS back in May. A note correspondence between yourself and the authority, where actually 2 of those at the time current assessments were shared, I think in June 2019, and it's part of the current arrangement that when we reconsider RPAS and the revised evaluation in March 2021, that the 2 updates mentioned there by ACC Williams will be coming back to the committee. So the authority were cited prior to the discussion in 2019, and we've been assured that the revisions will come back to the authority in 2021.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that, both of you. I wonder, Mr Williams, I note what you say about prior to operational deployment, but were all the assessments on drones and BWV undertaken before the acquisition of these technologies? And if not, why not?
They were carried out concurrently and actually on receipt of the final product, and for a number of very important reasons. First of all, we didn't feel that the detail that came from the manufacturer in terms of many of the technical aspects of the drones would necessarily be sufficient for us to impart them into a DPIA or an EQHRIA in a way which was comprehensive. We wanted to actually understand, utilise and see the equipment first so that we can incorporate its likely use into those assessments, and therefore prior to any operational deployment those assessments were carried out, but not prior to receipt of them on purchase, if that makes sense. So there was a concurrency to that work being undertaken. It was always very important that it was undertaken, and there was no intention, nor was it seen through, that they would ever be deployed prior to that work being finished. But there was a need to actually see the technology, see its utility, how it would be actually applied within the Police Scotland context, and then ensure that was built in accurately to those two bits of work, which really required it to happen concurrently as opposed to after before the drones were actually in our possession.
But surely, Mr. Williams, you assess a capability and your intended use thereof, and you assess whether a product A, B or C is going to meet that before you acquire it at considerable expense to the public purse, rather than await acquisition. That's completely back to front, isn't it? And takes us back to where we were with the cyber kiosks, a considerable piece of expenditure where a similar approach was adopted.
Again, just to reassure you, there is an EQHRIA and a DPIA in place, and they were in place prior to any operational use of the technology. The technology around drones and the supply of them changes at a very, very rapid pace. And going through the procurement process within the budgets that we had meant that technology was actually changing as we went through the process itself. So whilst I absolutely acknowledge and accept your concern in terms of it not being carried out prior to the purchase itself, and yes, we did have a very good idea of how we would utilise the drones themselves, it felt appropriate and proportionate to ensure that once we better understood the detail, the technology and the technical specifications, that we articulated them into those two very important documents as part of the procurement process. So they ran concurrently. It wasn't quite one after the other, one before the other. It was more concurrent, and I think that is relevant in these circumstances.
Okay, I'm not sure if I'm reassured by that. Colleagues have a number of further questions on this, and our next questions are from Shona Robertson. Shona, please.
Good morning, everyone. Can I first of all just ask what level of stakeholder engagement was involved in drawing up these assessments, and were any significant concerns raised prior to the acquisition of drones and body-worn videos, and if so, what were they and how were they addressed? Maybe initially to Mr. Williams, please.
Yeah, we carried out a significant period of research over a 3 to 4 year period prior to any procurement of the drones themselves to understand and benchmark against drone usage elsewhere in the United Kingdom, particularly in England and Wales, and to consider what we would have to do and what stakeholders we would require to work with to enable the deployment of the drones in a safe and effective way. And of course, much of that was technical, for example, working with the Civil Aviation Authority, but of course, much of it was also in relation to governance and oversight. So again, ensuring the SPA were aware of our intentions and putting appropriate reports through the various committees that were utilised prior to the procurement themselves. Once we actually took delivery of the drones, we communicated with a significant number of stakeholders, from local authorities to scrutiny chairs. That was a notification process of the arrival of the drones and our intended use of it. And I would stress again that the drones are, and still are, going through a period of evaluation. This was new and emerging technology. It was technology that we wanted to utilise and get a better idea of the utility of. And of course, when we did intimate our intention to utilise it. We did it in a very public way through the media, through writing to a number of different stakeholders, through social media, as well as traditional press launches and so on, to make sure that there was a wide appreciation of the acquired kit that we had and how it would predominantly be used.
Can I just ask whether there were any significant concerns raised by any of the stakeholders that you consulted?
There was a number of concerns obviously raised in relation to, for example, potential concerns or considerations over, say, Article 8, right to privacy. And we very carefully ensured that in our EQHRIA we considered those. We built in the relevant acknowledgement of that and the mitigation that would be appropriate should there be any use of the drones to ensure a proportionality, a justification and an accountability for their deployment. So again, there are a number obviously of elements of, for example, Article 8 Human Rights Act, which allow us to protect public safety, national security and so on and so forth. I won't go into them all now. But we absolutely made sure that those concerns were recorded, articulated, and of course, in each and every deployment of the drones, carry out a site survey which includes sensitivities, legislation, concerns, intrusion, and other considerations around safety in a wider sense, to make sure that all of those concerns and issues are addressed and considered prior to deployment.
Okay, thank you for that. Looking ahead, what further assessments will need to be made as these technologies develop and their use increases? Do witnesses envisage early engagement, for example, with the Scottish Biometrics Commissioner once appointed to discuss these matters further? We start with yourself, Mr. Williams.
Yes, absolutely. I think as a force, we absolutely recognise that emerging and new technologies, of which drones are a part, is a developmental area that requires very clear governance, oversight and reassurance. And there's no doubt the new Biometrics Commissioner will be a very important link into the force across a whole host of different areas. The force has just established its first biometrics committee, chaired by Deputy Chief Constable Malcolm Graham. And of course, our work will tie into that and more widely into the work of any commissioner in due course. We had the opportunity to use our independent ethics advisory panel on the 12th of January this year. As you know, that's a relatively new and established now relationship that we have. It started in the autumn of last year, after the drones were first deployed, and it was very helpful, and indeed a lot of very positive, constructive and meaningful feedback came out of that that we are now considering and will build into the evaluation back to the Scottish Police Authority in March of this year. So we absolutely acknowledge and appreciate the need for reassurance, clarity, governance, the elements of emerging technologies that must be considered in terms of oversight, and that its use falls within the bounds of both the legislation, but equally the public the public confidence and legitimacy that we enjoy. So that is something we will absolutely undertake to do, and I know that DCC Graham and his board will link in very, very directly.
Okay, and Mr. Richards, you want to respond?
Yeah, if I could, thank you. The ACC has obviously articulated the stakeholder assessment in regards to RPAS. From my perspective, body-worn video, it's important to note that the force doesn't have a body-worn video, national body-worn video solution at this time. There are a couple of small pockets of initiatives, the largest being up in the Legacy Grampian area where there are 250 officers. That received extensive stakeholder engagement prior to launch in 2010 and also quite prolonged public consultation. It's had 2 evaluations, 2011. It was evaluated by the force itself in 2012. It received a a practical assessment from HMICS, both of which came back showing it to have been a success. In advance of any national solution for Police Scotland, we would absolutely ensure broad stakeholder assessments and engagement, as well as public consultation. Just as the ACC was talking about for RPAS, there will be an ethics panel convened for body-worn video. That's booked in over the next few months, and appropriate EQHRIA and DPIA assessments will be in place as well.
Okay, thank you for that. Most helpful. Mr. Sillars, I think you want to come in.
Yes, thanks very much. On the more general point of local engagement and that being eminently good practice, I'd just like to again refer to the written submission given by the SPA, in the last page of which we try to outline, as you started your comments, a way forward, a better and more comprehensive way of dealing with these emerging new technologies. Now, within that, the sentiment of that, what we're developing within the SPA at the moment in collaboration with Police Scotland and other partners is trying to develop a more of a protocolized and actual flexible but firm framework within which we as a policing system can assess these emerging new technologies. Now, within that framework, we have, as we've detailed on the last page of our submission there, the value of the full, what we've described as full internal and external stakeholder engagement. I think implicit within that, we mean local communities, local authorities. I note with interest to local authorities taking the time to make submissions today, and I think that would be part of that overall suite of opinion, evidence, research, and a wide-ranging perspective, which allows us, as ACC Williams said, to balance and take a judgment on that balance between the Article 2 provisions for the protection and safety of the citizens and the Article 8 provisions for the need for privacy. And I think interesting submissions to this committee today from CIPR, showing that even with these technologies that we're talking about today, there isn't a coherent view in academia. So again, that would be one thing that we would like to take forward into the more general consideration. Again, the views of the public. I know, again, the public submissions to today's session aren't necessarily coherent and just show the broad range of views. So I think what the authority needs to do is encourage Police Scotland to take the widest possible range of views in justifying its decisions. And as ACC Williams has said, a human rights approach is actually, I think, a very good framework within which to look at this. The excellent submission made by the Scottish Human Rights Commissioner, although not bespoke to this issue, was, I thought, a very good piece of writing that shows how you can deal with that balance between Article 2 and Article 8, whilst actually playing in things like proportionality, being able to justify your decisions, making them explainable to the public, and actually ensuring that they are for that legitimate and legal purpose. So I think going forward, which was your initial question, I think we do need to learn the lessons, and certainly the authority's initial approach would be for a far wider collection of evidence, hearing of views, to help us with Police Scotland and make a judgment call on the use of those new technologies.
Thanks, Mr. Sillars. I think you maybe anticipated my last question, which was regarding the SPA's recommendation for an evaluation of the use of body-worn cameras. So just to confirm, you've said that external stakeholders will be included in that. I think that's the gist of what you were saying.
Certainly, I think that the quality of the evaluation, in my opinion, is increased the more different people you engage with. So, for instance, the CIPR submission indicated that actually they were very enthusiastic about making a contribution. So academia would certainly have a part to play. The main point I'd make there on the body-worn video evaluation is the fact that it's been in use within the northern region in Scotland for considerable time. So there must be a very strong local opinion based on experience of officers with those. And I think the gist, as you say, of what we would say in the authority is that we should absolutely recognise that almost a decade's worth of local opinion, local experience, particularly into partners in the justice system, to see those lessons. So I think the evaluation that we would like to see on body-worn video just takes all of those different voices and then makes a proportionate and judged recommendation into the authority, should we be moving forward with a body-worn video solution.
Okay, thanks. That's all from me, convener.
Thank you. Shona, our next question is from Rona Mackay. Rona, please.
Thank you, convener. Good morning. Good morning, all. I wonder if I could just talk in a general sense about, the new technologies that are being bought and planned to be implemented. There are many claims made about the benefits of the technologies, but there are also claims that there's not been enough evidence and research done. And I hear what you've been saying to my colleagues about assessments and ECHR impacts, etc., which is fine. But can you maybe outline how you will evaluate the effectiveness of the, any of the new technology? How will that be done in sort of practical terms? Will it be done in terms of how much easier it was for police to make arrests, etc., or I just want to know the practical side of how you would actually evaluate this before you commit to more ongoing technology. If I can ask Mr. Williams first, please.
Thank you. A couple of things I'll say. I'll mention body-worn video here as well, because actually it's quite practical, some of the examples that can be given around how you might evaluate and measure the effectiveness of it, but I'm sure Chief Super Richards may have more he wishes to add. But having been involved back at the start of some of the considerations around body-worn video a number of years ago, press at any great pace, a lot of work was done to evaluate its use in the North East. And some of the measures that were very practical and appropriate there were, for example, number of assaults on officers, the level of police complaints and how they were how they were closed off, and whether or not the body-worn video helped actually the timeline around that, the number of early guilty pleas through the criminal justice system as a result of the use of body-worn video and the footage that it recorded. And in that sense, there was some very, very practical measures that were easy to articulate and very powerful in terms of the benefits it has shown. In terms of drones, they are less straightforward in many ways. There are quite easy measures around efficiency, because we know that drones are a part of our air support unit, and they're a build on, and they're an asset that can be used other than the police helicopter. And if you just think of the raw economics of that, clearly drones are better value for the public purse. They are far cheaper to operate on an hour-by-hour basis, but they don't do as much as the helicopter in many other ways in terms of some of the utility they have. They have a shorter flight time, they can't carry passengers, some obvious things like that. However, we are considering other ways to measure their effectiveness, and that does include going through each and every incident that they've been deployed to, the success of that deployment, the utility that has been seen as a result of their deployment itself, be it for example, the purposes of photographing a serious crime scene or a road junction where there's been a fatal accident, and whether or not that has enabled the officers, the inquiry officers and the SIOs to proceed through their reporting channels more effectively and with greater ease. So there's some less tangible work that will take place with the drones, but that is work that is ongoing, and part of the evaluation back to the Scottish Police Authority, of course, will capture that.
Thank you. I'm not sure if anyone else wants to come in on that with an opinion. Nope, not seeing anyone. Thank you, convener. That's me.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Rona. Our next series of questions are from Fulton McGregor. Fulton, please.
Thank you, convener, and good morning, panel. Witnesses will be aware that the subcommittee was recently Police Scotland has a sound legal basis for the use of cyber chaos. I'm wondering if witnesses could outline the legislative basis on which drones and body-worn videos depend. And I'll just roll my first two questions into one, convener, if that's all right. I wonder if you could also comment if there are standard operating procedures or codes of practice in place for the use of drones and body-worn video cameras, and if so, can you detail the parameters of these? A suggested order from myself would be ACC Williams, and then Chief Superintendent Richards, and then Mr Sivers if he's wanting to come in. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I picked up all of that. The sound broke slightly, but in terms of legislation that underpins drones and codes of practice and so on, I'm very happy to cover that. The use of drones is very, very closely legislated for and governed through the Civil Aviation Authority. There's both legislation for the wider public in terms of licensing, ownership and registration, but equally for an organisation like Police Scotland, so a commercial use, if you like, and a law enforcement use, there are additional hurdles to overcome, and we've worked very closely with the CAA to ensure that we comply with all appropriate air navigation legislation, appropriate training for those that utilise the drones, and that they are utilised and understood in a way which is within the parameters the CAA set for ensuring the safety of all air traffic, of which drones are included. That detail is available, and there's quite an extensive safety manual that has been produced by us, and a yearly update that is submitted into the CAA for those purposes. Of course, on an individual basis, when we operate the drone, it has to be done within any legislative framework. But I suppose I would stress at this point a couple of, I think, very important points. First of all, the drone has never been used in any covert nature. It is a very overt piece of kit. It's used by officers that stand very close to it, within line of sight of it. You're in uniform, it makes a noise, and they stand by a very large 4x4 marked police vehicle. So its utilisation and the way it is deployed is taken into consideration through the EQHRIA that I've already mentioned, and of course the DPIA, to ensure that any deployment is appropriate, proportionate and justified. And that has to be covered on each and every occasion through a site survey that we carry out, and of course by the police incident officer who's in charge of the particular incident, inquiry, missing persons investigation or whatever. So I think all of that wrapped together maybe gives you a flavour for some of the legislation underpinning its use. But I'm happy to take any additional questions there may be. Otherwise, I'm happy to hand over to Chief Super Richards to cover body-worn video.
Thanks very much for that very comprehensive answer, and to ask the other witnesses if they do have anything they want to add to that.
Yeah, I would come in now in regards to body-worn video, if that's in order. Just along the lines of as the ACC's points that were raised there, Articles 2, 6 and 8 of the ECHR will be complied with, obviously, if the force were to implement a body-worn solution, which is the Chief Constable's clear wishes, given the unsustainable position we see in not having body-worn video compared to the rest of the UK. In addition to that, body-worn video is an overt technology, so it wouldn't be incumbent upon us to consider RIPSA at this stage. It wouldn't be used for any covert deployment at all. Standard operating procedures would be in place should a programme commence, and I know that there are operating orders for the legacy Grampian Police Initiative that's now become a programme that's still running with the 250 officers up there. Most importantly, and in regards to digital ethics, there are obviously standard operating procedures, guidance available in the public domain in regards to how the force retains data, uses images, and again, we would be compliant with that. And of course, the force values of fairness, integrity and respect will be the centre of everything we do.
Thank you. And Mr. Silver, would you want to come in on this?
Yes, thank you. If I could be very brief, just to point out that on RPAS specifically, part of the revised evaluation that the authorities asked for in March includes specifically that Civil Aviation Authority audit, which is mentioned in Police Scotland's evidence, so that we can, as an authority, be assured, as we have been previously, but actually by looking at the audit from the CAA, that all of the legal aspects from an aviation perspective have been taken forward. Also, you'll note in our written submission that part of that request has been a consideration from Police Scotland in terms more of the actual image retention and use perspectives, with our mention of any relevant surveillance camera code of conduct, similar to the use of CCTV. So that request into the committee, our committee in March, takes those dual aspects of the legality and the audit by the Civil Aviation Authority, and also the more general considerations of having a image capability for a policing purpose.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Convener, could I go on to a further question, which is specifically on drones? Is that okay to do that just now?
Yes, certainly, Fulton. Yes, of course.
Thanks, Convener. So as I said, moving on to drones specifically, the circumstances in which drones can be used have changed clearly since they were first acquired. And I'm wondering if I can ask if the necessary impact assessments have kept up to speed with those developments. And as an example, what level of engagement is carried out with stakeholders when drones are to be used to assist in policing events which involve the public? And I know that this was touched upon in earlier answers by ACC Williams, so I'm wondering if I can start there again.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just waiting for my mic to come on there. My apologies. Yes, we carry out direct engagement for each and every deployment of the drones with the public and the communities that are affected, if that makes sense, as best as we can and in a proportionate sense. So, if we take an example like Troon Beach, it's very important that the communities of Troon and the local residents in the vicinity of where we might utilise the drone are aware of our activities. And actually, prior to its deployment last year, we spent the day before literally knocking on doors, leafleting the public and making them aware of our intentions to operate and for what purposes and in what way. So we do advertise both on social media and in person with uniformed police officers the intention to utilise the drones in any way we can. And it's, you know, that would be the case for missing person searches or for any other activity that may be required. Equally though, there has been occasions when the drone has been deployed for, say, photographic purposes at a crime scene. This is a sterile area protected by police officers where there is no egress or entry for the public, and we may photograph an area on behalf of the Crown and Procurator Fiscal Service or on behalf of the SIO in a MIT. And that has also taken place, but in a more sterile environment where the engagement with the public is less, I think, critical, but still important. And we may still then make people aware in that immediate vicinity of our intentions and purposes. And again, just to re-emphasise, these deployments take place by officers in high visibility uniform, next to marked police vehicles, and with appropriate signage and other measures in place. So they're certainly not covert in any way, shape or form. They're done in a very public way, wherever that may take place.
Thanks for that. I think it is actually very useful to make the distinction between where drones may be used in areas where the public aren't having access to, as you say, as opposed to where they are. And although it might seem obvious now, it wasn't actually something that initially thought before asking these questions. So thanks for that. I'm wondering if any of the other witnesses want to come in this area, and this will be my last question, Convener.
If I could just very briefly reflect on I think the authority recognises the efforts that Police Scotland do go to for for local engagement with communities and citizens prior to the deployment of RPAS. However, I'd reflect on possibly a learning point that we can take forward from the submission from Inverclyde Council, that perhaps as part of that local engagement, a formal communication to the local authority may be helpful, because I know Inverclyde have expressed a concern that that wasn't part of the communication schedule. But I think with Police Scotland colleagues, that would be a very easy enhancement to make to the current arrangements, and I think it would build trust with the local authority in addition to the local community.
Okay, thanks for that.
Could I just come in as well, Convener, sorry, in regards to body-worn video, just a couple of points for me.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you.
Please come in.
Okay, the challenges that the ACC's mentioned in regards to RPAS are slightly different, obviously, to body-worn video. With regards to informing the public when we are using body-worn video, that is the routine. Camera isn't turned on unless the member of the public is made aware by the police officer, wherever possible, obviously. That will continue to be the policy should we have a national rollout. In regards to informing the public, when we are going to roll out body-worn video, as already mentioned, we're looking to do some extensive consultation, not only with the public themselves, but with the scrutiny boards, the elected members that represent them. In regards to an initial solution, though, for armed policing officers, where the need is greatest, and we are the only force in the UK that don't have armed officers with cameras, we would certainly be looking to engage with appropriate stakeholders and interest groups, and in advance of that option being made available to our armed policing staff, which again is the Chief's wish in the future.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. Our next questions are going to be from Shona, but before that, I wonder, could I put out a question, please, to Mr. Sillars? You've alluded, Mr. Sillars, to some of the evidence the committee's received, and we received evidence from the Law Society, and they recommend that strict regulation of the deployment of drones is necessary, and indeed say that a regime similar to the use of Regulation of Investigatory Powers Scotland Act 2000 should be in place. Now, we heard assurances from the ACC about the appropriateness, proportionality and justification for the use. Would the police authority be supportive of strict regulation on the deployment?
I think on that, the again, balance. The authority, certainly my recommendation to members, would not be to have a regulatory framework that was so strict that it impinged on that operational independence of the Chief Constable. I think that the current arrangement that we've got in place, for specifically talking about RPAS here, that was discussed between Mr. Martin Evans and DCC Malcolm Graham, allows that proportionate discriminatory decision making on an operational basis, as described in the correspondence, where operationally critical, as decided by a senior officer, I think is one of the things that we must maintain. And that would be within a regulatory framework. However, I think where the committee will obviously discuss this more in March, would be where we can provide sufficient regulatory frameworks to promote public confidence without actually fettering, as the word was used by HMICS, that operational independence of the Chief Constable. And I think we put trust in that decision making, that the decision making would be bounded by and aligned to those values that we've agreed with Police Scotland of fairness, integrity, respect, but most importantly, again, the human rights. So I think that operational decision making, where they're balancing, as both the Chief Superintendent Richards and ACC Williams have said today, the balance between Article 2 and Article 8 should still be an operational decision by the Chief Constable and his delegated officers. And that's currently the arrangements in place. So I think the arrangements that's in place at the moment is fairly proportionate in that it allows the police to get on and do the job, but respectful of that balance between the two human rights.
Thank you for that, Mr. Sillars. Were you wanting in there, Mr. Williams?
Yes, just to echo, I think Mr. Sillars' comments here. I think that there is definitely, I believe, a need to move to, for example, a code of practice, which is better understood, which is available to the public to install that confidence in its use and the parameters within which it is utilised. Because I do think there is sufficient legislation out there at the moment to ensure that the use of it is done lawfully and proportionately, and that can be justified. But there is I think benefit on reflection from a code of practice that enables a wider understanding of the parameters and the spirit and the tone in which it is used, which I think is very important for public confidence and trust.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Our next series of questions are from Shona Robertson again. Shona, please.
Convener, we have already touched on this. It's going back to the use of drones, and further to what's been said already, and starting with Mr. Williams, whether you could provide a brief overview of the benefits which drones bring to policing. And I'll just wrap the second question in on that. Also, if you could tell us how many drones have been acquired by Police Scotland, how many of those have been used in operational policing, and set out the purposes for which they've been used to date. There was some reference earlier on to missing person activities and crime scene photographs, but it'd be helpful just to hear some further examples of the breadth of the use of drones in police work. So maybe starting with Mr. Williams.
Thank you. We have 3 drones. They're based in the north, 2 of them, and 1 in the west at our air support heliport in Glasgow. All have been used in an operational context at some point. And I mean, some figures between, if I go back to May 2019 through to November of last year, they've been deployed on a number of different scenarios. For example, on 59 occasions for missing person searches, but on 7 occasions for major incidents. That's like murders or significant events where there's been a request for support. They've been deployed on a number of occasions to take photographs of crime scenes or vehicle accident locations. And in addition, there have been deployments, for example, to try and prevent rural crime. One in particular, which had a number of stakeholders involved, was on a particularly large area of wind farm where there was a lot of equipment and technical equipment being stolen. We deployed there both by way of uniform patrolling by the officers themselves and also with some flight time for the drones, which had a significantly positive impact in terms of crime prevention and was very, very well received by the public that lived in the rural area itself, and of course the landowners and others who were involved in the request for its use. So it's been used across quite a wide variety of issues, but all of them have been in a way which was very, again, overt, has been to support crime prevention or public safety, or in the investigation of very serious crime, where there's been a request from a senior investigating officer or the Crime and Procurator Fiscal Service. Now, in terms of the utility and the helpfulness, clearly we're still carrying out that evaluation. However, as I said earlier, the helicopter is our other air asset, and we utilise it a lot, but it is very expensive. It is not always able to transit across the country due to weather and other such factors. So the drones offer us another tactical option other than the helicopter to do effectively what the helicopter does. In that sense, it can support the searching of, for example, coastlines and other inaccessible areas that it might be more dangerous or risky to put officers or other emergency responders to if we're looking, for example, for a missing person. In the terms of its photography capabilities, then of course, again, it gives an overview that we could do with a helicopter at great expense, but in a far more efficient and effective way, and in a way which is better value for the taxpayer and for the organisation. And in that sense, the drones do have a utility which, although not perhaps as flexible and enduring and sustainable as the helicopter, because it is a more resilient piece of kit, is still hugely beneficial to frontline operational officers, to service delivery, and to protecting the public in particular.
Just in terms of the numbers, would you envisage or would you want those numbers to increase? I mean, 3 seems quite limited in terms of all of those activities. I mean, what would you be looking to expand the number?
There is no intention at this stage to purchase more drones. We still, assess ourselves as being in that evaluation stage where we're utilising them, but trying to ensure ourselves that they do what we want them to do. The technology changes very quickly, and I think it's important that we work as part of not just a national Police Scotland context, but also in the UK policing context to benchmark ourselves, work with other agencies to ensure that what we're utilising and what is available is fit for purpose, and all of that is built into the evaluation that's currently ongoing. So I would absolutely, I wouldn't suggest that we wouldn't purchase more in due course, or that we wouldn't seek to utilise them, more than we currently do. However, as things stand, there's no immediate plans to do that, and we're working within the equipment that we currently own.
Okay. Would any of the other witnesses want to come in? Okay, back to you, convener.
Thank you, Shona. Our next question is from Rona Mackay. Rona, please.
My question was going to be about how to ensure legitimacy, justifiable, proportionate use of drones, but that's really been answered. So I just have one quick question. It's to ACC Williams. When you talked about the incident at Troon and how you asked residents and informed residents, etc., about your plans. Can I ask what you do in a situation where people object, and do you have a criteria? If more than one person said, "I'm not happy with that," what would you do? I mean, it's a bit hypothetical, possibly, but do you have a criteria for the number of objections you might get to a proposal to use drones?
Not per se, but it's a really important point that you make. Now, what I can confidently say is that in the occasions that we have deployed it and we have engaged directly with members of the public, there's been huge support for the use of the drones. We haven't had any negative feedback in that sense from the members of the public that we've spoken to in those scenarios directly, nor have we had any complaints articulated to us since their deployment some time ago. However, clearly if there was, it's very important that we consider it, we take it into context, and then we apply the judgment, proportionality and the justification that is obliged upon us through Article 8, for example, to ascertain whether or not, in the opinion of the police incident officer in charge, it is justifiable and proportionate in the circumstances. And I guess that could change depending on the nature of the complaint, the point that is made, and the context of it. So I would never say we would ignore such a concern. Equally, we may take it into account and not fly, or we may justify our flight based on the proportionality of the situation we're dealing with and the nature of the complaint that is made. That's up for the incident officer to articulate, account for and audit himself or herself.
Thank you, that's helpful. Thank you, convener.
Thank you very much indeed. Our next series of questions are from Liam MacArthur. Liam, please.
Thanks, convener, and good morning to the witnesses. I think this is probably for Mr Williams, but others can come in if they so wish. We've covered quite a bit of the ground in relation to the consultation with stakeholders. I think, Mr Williams, you've talked about the engagement at public events where it's of necessity a more ad hoc process and you've talked through the consultation with stakeholders and the development of the use of the technology. I just wondered whether you could articulate what is anticipated in terms of that ongoing consultation with stakeholders, whether it will be of an ad hoc nature or whether you're going to see it becoming more structured as part of an ongoing process.
I think on reflection, and it's fair to say that in recent months, since we've come back to visiting that wider consultation and reassurance piece, there is a need to consider how we, going forward, structure this in a more regular manner. I think, first of all, last week, the Independent Ethics Advisory Committee was hugely beneficial for us. That was the first occasion we've had the chance of floating a number of different issues around drones and concepts around it through that independent group, and it was very, very helpful in terms of the formal feedback and how we take that forward. That's made a number of, if you like, suggestions and recommendations that we take on, and I think as we report the evaluation into the SPA in March, it's very important that we thereafter structure a regular update and feedback to the authority around the use of drones, the development of it, and how they've been employed operationally across the country. And that's something we certainly have the information that we can offer, and something that I would expect to happen. So I'm sure Mr. Sillars might have some thoughts on that, but it seems entirely appropriate and justifiable. So there's no doubt to me that we need to be articulating and evidencing the use, the purpose, and how they're deployed. And I think to go back to that point I made about a code of practice being a very positive step for us to develop, because I think that again offers some legitimacy and confidence to the public in terms of how we intend to use the drones themselves, the style, the tone and the parameters within which they're deployed. I think all of that is relevant and all of it needs to happen in the months ahead, and that's certainly the direction that we're travelling in.
That's very helpful. Maybe bring in Mr. Sillars in a second, but from what you're saying, Mr. Williams, is there an expectation within the SPA and Police Scotland that what we would see is more of that process happening in advance of changes of the way that the technology might be deployed, as opposed to the two things running coincidentally, as you were describing earlier on? I don't know whether, Mr. Williams, you want to come back in, and then I'll invite Mr. Sillars to respond to that in the earlier point.
Yeah, I think it is very important. If there was to be changes to the technology and we were to employ it in a different way, or there was different equipment, for example, at the moment there is no ability from the drones to downlink the images back into our control rooms like the helicopter does. The helicopter, the images it takes can be broadcast back to our control rooms to enable controllers and others to view the images. We can't do that with the drones, but it is something that we are running through in a procurement sense to enable that utility to be put in place. It makes sense. It means that they have far greater utility and actually can be used in a more effective way to protect the public. So that sort of development is the type of thing that we need to make sure that we are communicating, articulating and explaining to the authority, and then in due course to the wider public through any sort of code that might be employed. So yes, I think that does need to happen in advance, but there is also a concurrent element to it in terms of how we continue to update with what is happening with the here and now and the existing technology as it stands.
Thanks, Mr. Williams. Mr. Sillars, is there anything you want to add on that specific question?
I think I'd just emphasise the point that the ACC made there in terms of this not being finished, and to promote the principle of that continuous improvement in policing and continuous communication with stakeholders and continuous learning. I think it's very useful to be having this debate today, to have the debate that we'll have in March at our own committee, and also some of the submissions which give indication of an enthusiasm and an interest in this area, where those voices can certainly add much value. I know that CIPR indicate that actually there's a relative paucity of academic research on RPAS. I think Police Scotland's evolutionary and continual evaluation may well lend itself to part of that ongoing evaluation having an academic piece to it. And I think, as members have already alluded, once appointed the biometrics commissioner, bearing in mind the area that we're operating in, will obviously have, a very educated professional and perhaps strong views which can be fed into that ongoing learning. So I think from the authority, this is an iterative and process, and it's good to hear the ACC say that actually this will continue to evolve, and that in the future as we go forward, any decision making, I think, would be informed by a far wider view, with the introduction of things such as the Scottish Government's new independent advisory group on emerging and new technologies, which, although the remit of that group is to look at the frameworks for ethical and legislative oversight of that new technology, I think very much a tool with which that group could test those frameworks may be specific examination of things like RPAS and body-worn video. So I think from an authority point of view, I'd welcome that wider perspective and a wider listening to voices, and the wider gathering of evidence as we develop our knowledge within Scotland of the operation of RPAS.
Thanks very much, Mr. Sellers. ACC Williams, you talked there about downlinking. I'm not sure if that's the same as uploading, but there have also been issues or questions raised about the retention of the data and the information that's captured by drones. I wonder whether you could clarify what the policy is around the retention of that information, what happens where there's a risk of collateral intrusion at public events, for example, and what reassurance can be given to members of the public that any data that does not need, or information that does not need to be retained, will be dealt with appropriately and with some urgency.
Yeah, Police Scotland obviously has a very robust data retention policy, and that is governed in a number of different ways, and we obviously adhere to that, which includes the retention of, for example, photographic images. Let's say for a murder inquiry, we take a photograph of a location or a locus. That image would be passed to the senior investigating officer. It isn't held within the air support unit itself, and that is then submitted potentially as a production or evidence through the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal channels for the use in any justice process that thereafter follows. Our retention for serious crimes is up to 12 years, and for less serious 6 years, after which they're destroyed. So there is clarity already around, for example, the retention of imagery. Clearly, in each and every deployment, there is consideration given to the human rights articles that you've just referenced there, and collateral intrusion is very much part of that. The drones themselves, as I say, don't have a downlink ability, but what they do have is a small, effectively like a small SD card in the drone itself, so you can store some limited images there and photographs, should it be required, such as in an inquiry for a murder, for example, and that is then followed through with our existing data retention policy. We always take into account collateral intrusion, and we always balance it with that Article 8 requirement, and there are only a certain number of lawful exemptions where we can utilise the drones and where there may be collateral intrusion, public safety being one of them, national security, prevention of disorder and crime being others. And of course, each and every deployment is assessed across all of those various elements to ensure that it is proportionate, justifiable and appropriate in the circumstances. The drone, just again to re-emphasise, has never been deployed covertly. It isn't used as a surveillance platform for covert surveillance in any way, shape or form. It is an overt deployment where we do everything we can to minimise collateral intrusion by advertising the fact that it is in the air. It's not done in any way, shape or form to undermine that, and I think that's an important point to make at this stage.
Thanks for that. I think, as the committee's observed during previous evidence sessions, the fact that data photographs, for example, can be retained for 3 years or indeed 6 years, shouldn't necessarily mean that they're kept for anything like that long and should be disposed of safely as quickly as possible and as appropriate. Just turning to the written evidence, ACC Williams from Police Scotland, you talk about drones accumulating a total of 129 hours of flying time since May 2019. Yet in the evaluation report submitted to the SPA's Policing Performance Committee in November last year, it states that drones have completed 426 hours of flying since being delivered to Police Scotland. I just wonder whether you were able to reconcile those two rather different figures, what the actual figure is in terms of flying time for the drones.
I immediately can't do that. I was unaware of that difference. My figures are certainly the former and the lower level of flying time that you articulated there. So I would have to take that away and be very happy to come back with clarity as to why. It may be that one is related to, if you like, overt operational deployment, and the other includes non-operational, so practice, training, and so on and so forth. But I need to clarify that and be very happy to come back and do so.
That'd be very helpful. Would appreciate that. Thanks very much to the witnesses. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you. We're shortly going to move on to a series of questions on the body-worn video. But Mr. Williams, can I maybe touch on just a few bits relating to evidence we've received that you may be aware of before we move to that? The evaluations on drones indicates that, and I quote here, feedback received from internal stakeholders and the public has been overwhelmingly positive, with significant support for the use of technology. I wonder, could you please elaborate on the evidence to support that claim, please, and whether that includes support beyond searching for missing and vulnerable people, please?
Yes, I believe it does. And of course, the evidence from, for example, internal stakeholders would include divisional commanders across Scotland. When we first commenced the assessment of drones and their potential purchase, procurement and use, did a lot of work with the divisions themselves to articulate and find out how they might be employed and what views local divisional policing officers would have to their utility. That was very positively received, that feedback. It was seen as having a number of different potential uses, and of course we've gone on to explore some of them since the drones have been delivered. So there is more specific feedback of that nature, and of course we could articulate that in more detail to you, which I'd be very happy to do. But those internal elements of feedback, similar to that was received publicly, for example, from the HMI, have all indicated a broad utility to drones, a need to embrace emerging technology, the efficiency and effectiveness benefits that come as opposed to the helicopter, and the fact that they are potentially able to operate in a wider geographic area in terms of their deployment than the helicopter, of which of course there is only one, all add up to being very positive in terms of the feedback received.
That doesn't, as you'll know from the evidence, extend to the views of the Scottish Police Federation, who say, and I quote here, remains of the view that a properly evidenced position for the purchase of RPAS was never made. In fact, they go on to say that the purchase was rushed to spend reform funding, and also highlight issues which are in the public domain about the limitations on deployment due to weather, and indeed the weather-proofness or otherwise of the devices. Can you comment on these important issues that have been raised with the committee, please?
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, I would stress, obviously, that this is emerging technology. It's developmental, and it was never purchased on an assumption that it would be everything to everybody. Far from it. It was purchased in a way and at a time when we knew that it would offer some utility, but that we would have to exercise that, deploy them operationally, and evaluate it thereafter in terms of that technology. I do believe there has been benefit and utility. I do believe they've offered some huge benefits to frontline operational policing, and to actually the families, for example, of missing persons, and the deployment of the drones to assist in the support and search for their loved ones. The Police Federation position in relation to whether or not this would reform money. I did see that feedback. I can't comment on, and I would have to go back and check the financial position some years ago when this was first put in place. But I'm not aware of that, and nor do I broadly agree with the position of the Police Federation in terms of this being some form of PR stunt. It's anything but that, and it's far from that. And it has been utilised, as I say, in a number of areas to improve the professionalism of major inquiries, to reassure the public in significant areas of disorder, to search for 59, 60 different incidents of missing people, all of which have enabled us to provide a level of service to the public which was enhanced on what otherwise may have been available. So I do think there is utility, and I do think there's been benefit as a result of it.
On the question of rushed, if you had further information about the timing in relation to budgets, on reflection, the extent of waterproofness of the equipment, is that a factor that would be considered in any future purchase? And have you reflected on whether that was an error of judgment in acquiring equipment which had that significant fault?
Clearly, the equipment itself wouldn't have been purchased had we known that, and it was never part of the manufacturer's offering at the time that was the case. And I might add that it has since been remedied and resolved, and a number of improvements have been made to the device from the manufacturer to enable it to fly in more inclement weather. We were very fortunate in Police Scotland that we had no issues of mechanical failure as a result of the weatherproofing of the equipment, but that wasn't the case elsewhere, and some forces in England and Wales did suffer failures of the equipment as a result. We took a very risk-averse approach to that and made the decision not to fly the drones in that sort of inclement weather until we could be assured of their airworthiness. That remedy has now taken place, and the drones are safely flying. So whilst of course that was an issue, and a very concerning one, I think we dealt with it very sensibly, and it's now been resolved.
Thank you for that. Before moving on, one final point to put you regarding the term covert surveillance, ACC. You've said that Police Scotland do not use drones to conduct covert surveillance and make every effort to make the public aware of the activity. And now, drones are less visible than a helicopter, and people can be unaware they're being filmed, and prior consent is not obtained from the public. What do you mean by covert surveillance? The Law Society, for instance, questioning the meaning of covert, and whether drones might be used, their words, as a fishing exercise. What's your response to these concerns, please?
Well, first of all, I would very robustly rebut any fishing exercise analogy or any use of the drones in any way, shape or form for such matters since their operational deployment. RIPSA defines covert surveillance in a very detailed way, and that's surveillance which is intended to be carried out without the subject knowing that it's being carried out. And clearly that's not something we have ever employed the drones to do, nor is it anything we intend to employ the drones to do. Be very happy to actually provide an example or a demonstration of the drones, so you can actually see the size, the noise that they make, which isn't insignificant, and the fact that they actually fly at a relatively low level, up to a couple of 100 metres, for example, more routinely, and not in a way which is removed from the incident they're dealing with, as may be the case, for example, with the helicopter. They are deployed, as I said before, in line of sight of officers in full uniform, high visibility uniform, and the vehicle that they travel in, and we do advertise and articulate the deployment of the drones in advance of it taking place. So whilst we always take into account collateral intrusion and the proportionality of their use, I'm very confident that there are no concerns around that covert element of surveillance or any confusion over their deployment in that spirit.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that. Our next series of questions are about the body-worn cameras, and the first set of questions are from the Deputy Convener, Margaret Mitchell. Margaret, please.
Thank you, Convener, and Good afternoon to the panel, for we are in afternoon now. We know from evidence received that it's been Police Scotland's desire to roll out body-worn cameras nationally since 2017, and we know that the use and pilots of the body-worn cameras and the video footage has been in operation prior to the single police force in Grampian and Strathclyde since 2010-2011, and thereafter another 14-month pilot in Division A, and more recently in the North East. Now, some of my colleagues have touched on the evaluation carried out and covered the benefits, but I wonder if I could maybe ask each of you in turn a different area, starting with Mr. Williams, to set out quite clearly the benefits. You've mentioned assault being reduced. You've mentioned maybe better relations with the public, but I wanted maybe to home in particularly on the rural aspects. For example, evidence from the Scottish Partnership on Rural Crime, and the court implications of the independent witness and what that can mean, plus anything else that you think should be noted down as the benefits of the body-worn cameras from their use from 2010 to date.
Certainly, I'll run through a few of these points, particularly those that you focus in on there, and obviously Chief Super Richards may well have some additional detail he can add as one of the digital policing leads. I think that point about good evidence is a very good place to start, though. Clearly, the use of body-worn video is still undertaken, should it be in place, within the bounds of evidential, the evidential rules of Scotland. So there's no shortcutting the criminal justice process rightly within Scotland as a result of body-worn video. But what it does produce and what it does offer clearly is best evidence of incident, of the engagement, of the situation in whatever shape or form that may present. And what we've found, and what I would stress, is that gives a far higher level, and a level which can be given some credibility and underpinned with integrity, of accountability of officers in a public setting. And that's hugely important. It's hugely important to trust and confidence, and therefore it's hugely important to legitimacy. And it enables officers to be confident in their engagement with the public, but equally the public to be confident that their engagement with the officers is being recorded, and therefore offers protection both to them and the officers in addition. And you mentioned police assaults reducing, which I think is a hugely important element and benefit to focus on, but equally the reduction in vexatious complaints and the resolution times that are associated with complaints that are made where body-worn video evidence can be used to substantiate or otherwise the complaints made. I think the criminal justice elements are very important, so just touching on them as you mentioned. The early guilty pleas as a result of the submission of body-worn video evidence were significant in the North East, and that clearly has huge benefits for the wider justice system in terms of its efficiency and effectiveness, cost, public time and money, and the time that officers spend at court when they could be otherwise engaged in frontline operational duties. All of those are enormous benefits. They can be measured and were done for the Aberdeen pilot in particular. Rural crime and protection, clearly again, is hugely important. We know that officers in our more rural areas often work alone or with other agencies to support them directly, and therefore the use of body-worn video as a further evidence support to them is enormously positive. And whilst officers may often pair up with, say, special constables or agents of other jurisdictions such as local authorities or SEPA or the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency, the body-worn video evidence that they also carry themselves just adds another layer of accountability and confidence to the work that they carry out in partnership. all of those things I think are positive. I hope I haven't stolen Chief Super Richard's thunder by adding all of that, but he may have some additional thoughts that he wishes to add to my comments.
Thank you for that. It's helpful. I think particularly the point about the court appearances and early plea is particularly apt just now when we're seeing such a backlog of cases. Anything that can help that must be a positive thing. Mr. Richards, I wanted to ask you about this claims of lack of evidence, because it seems to me, looking at the submissions we've had, there is a wealth of evidence going back to 2010-11 and then to Division A's use of it in a 14-month pilot, and then on to more modern days. So how much of this is captured and how much is being used? And then maybe I can ask Mr. Sillars in a separate question his cognizance of this. So Mr. Richards.
Thank you. Yeah, in regards to the evidence that you referred to there, we have obviously the original assessment of the A division, which is Aberdeenshire, usage 250 officers, where, as the ACC has alluded to, the key benefits were in particular in regards to public confidence, feedback as having increased, some crime reduction as well, complaints against the police and about body-worn video were minimal. Officer assaults dropped, and we know that there is as I've said, a horrendous increase in that at the moment. The Chief Constable's pledged to address, and this would be an option clearly to help him in addressing that challenge. Stakeholder feedback at the time for community safety partnerships and staff feedback as well. We've obviously seen that reflected in the Scottish Police Federation submission, as well as our own evaluation, or Grampian Police's evaluation at the time. As I say, HMICS independently evaluated the Grampian experience of body-worn video, and that was very much echoed those findings. I think it's important to add a couple more things into that. The introduction in particular of an armed policing solution to body-worn video, the absence thereof in Police Scotland, is clearly answering not just the needs of the officers on the street, but also recommendations from, for instance, Dame Angelini's reports into complaint handling. You made the assessment that Police Scotland should accelerate implementation of body-worn video, and also guidance from the National Police Chiefs Council. Again, we are the only force that doesn't adhere to that guidance in regards to armed policing. We will conduct another evaluation of the experience in Grampian. That's been commissioned already and starts in combination not just with the Grampian Division, Legacy Grampian Division, but also with key stakeholders up there, such as staff themselves, staff association, and local partners. There has been an appetite to proceed with body-worn video since the advent of Police Scotland. You're correct in that assessment. It is a priority, a critical priority for the Chief Constable and his management team. The one challenge that remains, of course, is funding, with significant gap in our capital available to us year on year. We use that funding currently to keep the fleet in the state, for instance, ticking over. But there is definitely an appetite going forwards for us to address the absence in partnership with the SPA and other key stakeholders.
Before I leave you, if you could just confirm if the legacy force evidence has been captured. There may have been difficulties in doing that with technology, not being able to do it, but the legacy force had very good evidence, 95% of cases, 1B body-worn cameras used as evidence, resulting in an early plea, etc. Has that been captured, and is that still able to be used? That was from 2010 and 2011. It was Grampian and Strathclyde, and the figure I've just read out was Grampian.
In regards to Grampian, yes, we started that process. We believe that the systems are in place that allow us to ensure that we can look back retrospectively. I can't speak for the period when Grampian ran that as an individual force. However, we do know that things like complaint handling and so forth, we do have evidence from. We've had a look at that quite closely and identified only one complaint in the last 4 years in regards, for instance, body-worn video. In regards to the Strathclyde usage, which was predominantly by the football unit, Focus as they were called, again, we've started the information trawl back into the systems to try and establish exactly what the metrics are that we can use to ensure that it has that kind of validity that we expect it to have. So yes, we believe we can get data, and we have information management systems in place that allow us to trawl that, if not in its entirety, certainly enough to give us a sound evidence base and evaluation.
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Sillars, if I could ask you what cognizance the SPA has taken of this evidence that does seem to be there going back quite some number of years.
Yes, thank you. I think the authority we recognise from the submissions that have been made to the subcommittee today that there is a wealth of evidence and opinion, both quantitative and qualitative information available. That's why in our written submission on the last page, the first bullet point, and to me the most important and very kind of strong bullet point is our request for an updated evaluation on the use of those body-worn video by Police Scotland, predominantly in the North region, but as you've alluded to, taking experiences from elsewhere. We do recognise, as you have yourself, that actually that initial evaluation is approaching a decade old now, and that there will be a wealth of new information, including from officers who have used the technology themselves, their opinions on its effect to their safety, the feedback from the justice system within the North region, where Police Scotland have made efforts to input that information into the justice system. There's now available quite a wealth of academic research, which we would like to see reflected into that evaluation. And then there's the local opinion, which if it hasn't been tested since 2011, then that would need to be updated so that we have a 2021 position. And I think that's what Chief Superintendent Richards has just committed to do, and has actually reported that that's already in place. So if that's in place, the SPA's interest in as articulated in that bullet point list, if the first one is already in motion, then that's good to hear.
Okay, thank you for that. Maybe I could move on to the next question about how many police officers currently have access to body-worn video in Scotland, and the feedback from the officers, staff associations, etc. Is there any negatives here? Is it overwhelmingly positive? In particular, I wanted to raise the point raised by the Association of Police Superintendents that there maybe is some problem, and the rollout nationally of body-worn cameras has maybe been held back by the conflation between using it for routine everyday policing, where there seems to be, according to Dame Eilish, and it'd be good to touch on that, an overwhelming positive case for its rollout, and its use in more specific, perhaps more pressurised occasions, specific occasions like, policing football or trying to identify hate crime. But generally in the routine policing, there seems to be evidence up to date from various sources, including I've quoted the Rural Partnership, that would be a very good thing. Is that a point, this conflation? And if so, could there be an incremental rollout for routine policing, and then look at maybe something like armed policing and the issues around that, and separately the policing of specific incidents or events rather, like football matches or maybe some special public event? And could I ask Mr. Richards on that one, and then I think Mr. Sillars.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll pick that up. The current number of officers, to answer the first part of the question, in Scotland that have cameras, we think there are circa 60 officers across some small initiatives locally in the kind of K Division, Paisley area in particular, and also in the Football Focus Unit. The other 250 officers are, as you've mentioned there, in A Division, which is the legacy Grampian area. Feedback from all officers in local policing is absolutely positive. We haven't had any negative feedback at all. And as I say, in the largest of those areas, which is the legacy Grampian area, we've only had one complaint from the public that we could find in the last 4 years. In regards to inflation, the challenge for the force at the moment is the biggest risk in terms of not having cameras, having the absence of body-worn video, is within armed policing. We are the only force in the UK that has armed officers deploying on a daily basis without cameras. Certain specialist firearms unit that work interoperably with the rest of the UK, our officers are disadvantaged when they go south of the border to do any training or to deploy, because they're the only staff without body-worn video that can record their activities and thereby be supported both in terms of giving evidence and in protection. The feedback from staff, as I say, is wholly positive, as it is, as far as we can see so far, from the public. But again, the evaluation that you mentioned there over the 10-year period that, in particular, A Division, previously Grampian, have had the system, will be captured, and we're doing staff surveys or events in particular to ensure that qualitative evidence is properly gleaned. We do absolutely, as a force, believe that a national option, so that's all police officers and staff in frontline roles, all body-worn video, is imperative. We think that's going to take approximately 24 to 27 months to achieve. A large period of that, as you'll appreciate, is going to be public consultation, a strategy for which we've already developed. We would like to think that consultation will be more targeted and concise in regards to armed policing, with appropriate stakeholder interaction and engagement in place, and we'll be able to get an option out for armed policing as soon as possible over the next 6 to 9 months, and in particular in advance of the UN Climate Conference in November, when our UK colleagues that are coming up from England and Wales as mutual aid, the armed policing units there, will come with body-worn video. So again, we wouldn't want police Scotland officers to continue to be disadvantaged in that regard.
Okay, thank you. And Fuller, if you could perhaps comment on this idea of incrementally to stop the conflation of the more contentious issues of capturing some evidence in body-worn cameras from what seems to be pretty well overwhelming, with the necessary checks and balances in place, positives of routinely rolling this out to capture everyday policing.
I think. Sorry, to be specific, there, the authority at this point hasn't, prior to any evaluation, actually, received any firm, tangible proposal from Police Scotland with regard to that relative prioritisation, and I'll talk about capital monies now. There is an opportunity, as I understand it, as I said, at the moment this hasn't been fully discussed between the authority and Police Scotland, which is due to take place in February. However, my insight at the moment, and this is just my personal information, is that the proposals which will be taken forward as part of that prioritisation, reflecting the critical and prioritised risk, particularly with armed policing, would be that Police Scotland may well propose an armed policing solution for body-worn video, which obviously would be a much lesser capital outlay than that which would be associated with a full rollout to all frontline officers. So there is, as your question alluded at the beginning, an incremental or a phased opportunity. At the moment, that hasn't been discussed in detail with the authority. The other thing which I would play into this debate on capital costing, affordability and budgeting would be... Sorry.
Stop here, Mr. Sillars, because other colleagues, and I don't want to encroach on their questioning, will ask you more specifically about the funding. So you've answered my question, and thank you very much for that. My final question, perhaps Mr. Richards, you could answer that it was about, is there a concern about police officers using their judgment to decide when to begin and end recording? And if so, how would this be addressed to assure public confidence? And if you could perhaps just comment briefly on this idea of the necessity for routine policing and maybe the conflation that sometimes gets in the way when it's more contentious events that the body-worn cameras are used to police. And that's Mr. Williams, sorry. I've already heard from you, Mr. Richards. Mr. Williams, please.
Sorry, could I ask you to repeat that question again? My apologies, Deputy Convener.
The concern about police officers using their judgment to decide when to begin and end recording and how you can restore public confidence. And I didn't get to ask you about this Association of Superintendents submission about they thought conflating something more, policing more contentious events detracted from what seems to be the overwhelming benefit, especially in the most recent report from Dame Eilish of the benefits for everyday policing.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with the final point there, if I may. Yeah, I think there probably has been a conflation in some of the reporting and media around the use of body-worn video. For example, in a football setting, around some of the challenges officers face when they are gathering evidence and targeting, let's say, sectarian behaviour, has undoubtedly, influenced probably some of the thoughts and views of body-worn video itself. I think it's very important to separate them out, and I think it is very important to focus on the evidence that is available from the routine deployment of it, the everyday use, because that is when the vast majority, of course, of our engagement with the public takes place in a whole host of different situations, incidents and occasions. So that is relevant, but I think we can separate that out. I think the other point I would make, going back to your first point about the public confidence and the use of switching on or off, I will ask Matt to come back with maybe what the latest technology offers in terms of that. But for example, if we look at armed policing, which is perhaps the highest risk area of body-worn video use in terms of protecting actually the accountability of officers of decision-making and judgment, many of the systems that are employed, but of course we would have to evaluate what's best for us, operate on a purpose when, as soon as the weapon is unholstered, the camera comes on, for example. So it is automatic. The technology drives the recording of it to ensure that in a situation like that, the risk situations and the threats are fully recorded as you would expect. Equally, there's also a need for officers to articulate, warn, and speak to the public when they do put their video on, and there would need to be protocols, parameters, and a code of practice and training rolled out to ensure that it was done in a way which was appropriate and proportionate on each and every occasion. Some of the most advanced systems these days may well do that automatically, and others require, for example, a touch of the camera before it operates. So maybe Matt will have a more up-to-date position on that than I do, given his involvement with that digital policing environment. But I'm very confident that whatever the solution that we end up with, it will be one that puts that confidence, trust and legitimacy at its heart.
Thank you. Mr. Richards, briefly.
Yes, thank you. The ACC is absolutely correct. There are various systems which can be deployed and used, and how the camera turns on is dependent on the system that you invest in. It's our intention, as is the case currently in the Legacy Grampian area, to have a camera system that is activated by the officer, his or herself, with a prior warning to the member of the public, the individual involved in the filming, that they are going to commence filming where possible. Obviously, some spontaneous instance, that's not always the case. Certainly, in regards to the decision-making by the officers on the ground, as the ACC alludes to, there will be substantial and extensive training and a consistent approach. And as was mentioned earlier, the appropriate standard operating procedures will be in place too. But as always, police officers, when they're out on the ground, they conduct dynamic risk assessments, identifying the nature of policing, and everything they do is based around the national decision-making model, which underpins all assessments by officers and police staff when faced with situations and kind of scenarios that officers deal with on a day-to-day basis. So I'm quite confident that our staff, as professional as they are, will apply the same rigour and the same professionalism to the use of body-worn video as they do, for instance, with firearms, taser, baton, cuffs, barber, all the systems available to them to keep them and the public safe.
Thank you very much. That concludes my questioning. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you, Margaret. Patiently waiting to ask her questions is Rhoda Grant. Rhoda, please.
I was wanting to ask some questions around the funding, and I think those questions could go to Barry Sillars. We've heard that we're looking to roll out body-worn video within 27 months. Do you have an estimation of what that would cost on a national basis, and has the funding been found?
Can I answer that? So principally, the funding has not at this point been allocated, as I've alluded before. The actual prioritisation process, the discussion between Police Scotland and the authority to even set, if you like, the relative priority list of capital asks hasn't been firmed up yet. There's then obviously the Scottish Government budget setting process, which would follow that, before I could categorically say to you that there was funding in place for the full rollout. As I started to say before, there are various options for funding that, depending on what that capital allocation looked like, we could, with Police Scotland, consider through the authority. So the first of which, and the least cost, would be an armed policing only solution. The next step up from that would be a very much greater capital cost, which would look at body-worn cameras across all of the frontline officers. And the point I was about to make earlier was to recognise, as the authority will, having considered what is the outline business case for a system called the Digital Evidence Sharing Capability, which is effectively the infrastructure which a number of the submissions have noted, and indeed it's also in Dame Elish's report that the necessary infrastructure would have to be in place for a wide-scale rollout. At the moment, that programme hasn't been to the authority for FBC either. So there are a number of unknowns at the moment, which would require to be confirmed, mostly around the capital allocation, before I could give you an actual, firm statement on what would be available and when it would be available. But what Police Scotland colleagues have described in general terms is the preparatory work should that funding become available, and it be high enough prioritised within the process that we haven't completed yet between Police Scotland and the authority with regard to the capital allocation. So unfortunately, I can't give you a definitive answer at the moment, but hopefully that information gives you the kind of moving parts that the authority and Police Scotland will need to consider.
Rhoda, okay, sorry, can I interrupt there, Rhoda? I beg your pardon. The Chief Superintendent Richards has a figure that may help there, just to inform, if we could maybe go briefly to Chief Superintendent.
The initial synopsis that we have in regards to should the Chief decide to lead on a body-worn video option is that in the first year, if our aim was to equip our armed police officers, which it would be those 540 odd officers, that would have cost us approximately £500,000 for that option. And thereafter, obviously, there'd be revenue costs associated with that. So if you consider there are 17,234 officers in Police Scotland, you'll appreciate that the wider national rollout would be significantly costly. However, we believe that that's money well spent, and we need the revenue afterwards to keep that going for the following years.
Could it just on the back, the annual cost of running the cameras we already have?
I don't have those figures to hand, unfortunately, but I can certainly find them and make them available to the committee in due course. That'll be one of the parts of our overall review that we're going to put in place.
That would be useful. And if the money is not being made available either from the government or through the police authority, I mean, is the intention to run out? I mean, I think the time frame that Mark Williams gave was 27 months. So it sounds to me as if there is a commitment to do that. And if so, where would that funding come out of? Would it have an impact on police budgets, current police budgets, and indeed police numbers?
Currently, there isn't funding in place, and I believe this will be one of the discussions that takes place with the SPA board on Friday. The Chief Constable will be attending. There is an absolute appetite to do this, in particular for armed policing, in a shorter period than 27 months for those units. The one challenge for us continues to be that funding, and no, my perception absolutely is it wouldn't affect police numbers. This will be capital and reform funding in the first instance we'll be looking for.
Okay, so is it possible to update on that when it happens?
Sorry, you broke up there. Could you repeat that?
Sorry, could we get an update on the outcome of those discussions? I think it would be helpful for the committee.
I'm absolutely certain that will be possible through SPA and the Chief Constable's office. I'll take that back, of course.
Okay, I've just got a couple of quick short questions, I think, for Mark Williams. Just with regarding the consultation, you said earlier that the public had been broadly supportive, but I wonder if anyone has raised any significant concerns about that. And also you talked about lone working. I know previously there was concerns that this would mean that more police officers would work alone, and there were some safety concerns attached to that. Is that the case, or what is the protocols that people are thinking about for the rollout?
Thank you. Yeah, you're right. There has been broad support when the drones have been deployed in the vicinities or incidents. The feedback has been very positive indeed. However, as the convener will know, and as you will all have seen, the feedback from the consultation for the committee, for example, does raise a number of points from a number of organisations who have questions, queries and concerns. So it's very important that we digest them and ensure that the work going forward with the authority addresses any of those concerns, that the drones are operated in a way which answers those questions.
Sorry, can I cut across you? I was talking about the body-worn video rather than the drones.
My apologies. I think then, in a similar vein, we will do a lot of consultation in the months ahead around the use of body-worn video. It's part of the project planning process that Chief Super Richards has referred to, and indeed, and in a similar vein to my answer on drones, any response to the feedback by way of consultation will of course feature in there, including the use of the Independent Ethics Advisory Panel and other such stakeholders to gain a real appreciation of the concerns, the issues, and how we best reassure and address them.
Okay,
and finally, sorry, I didn't answer your point about solo working. Very, very important to point out that the purpose of body-worn video is not to enable solo working of police officers, far from it. Indeed, our deployment and our operational models for deployment for police officers is based on their personal security, the national security threat level, and other such matters. And body-worn video should not be confused as some sort of mandate to invoke or enforce officers to be put in any more danger. That far from it. This is about protecting officers, and our existing deployment strategies and policies will stand.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Rhoda. We're coming to the conclusion of our meeting. I have a couple of quick questions. I may direct them to yourself, Assistant Chief Constable. You've said you'll have regard to the information we've received. Again, the Law Society have highlighted that there's been academic research done in respect of the Football Coordination Unit, but there hasn't been an evaluation of the operation of the cameras within that unit. Is that something that you'll take on board?
I would reiterate that that football unit no longer exists, and the cameras are no longer used in that spirit. So that's probably an important context to set at the outset of my answer.
Okay, thank you very much. Lessons to be learned, perhaps. Finally, and time's not with us, I'm assuming that the protections regarding the acquisition, retention and deletion of data for the body-worn video isn't too dissimilar from that of the drones. Can you clarify a couple of points, please? There's clearly a balance, ACC, between the retention of data that's not required, but also the retention of data that may be assistance to the defence, for instance. Can you clarify around timeframes for that? Because, you know, as has been said earlier, clearly we don't want unnecessary information retained. But if there's an opportunity to be assistance to the court, then that's important that it's there.
Probably I will again bring in Matt for maybe some of the detailed answer to this point, but it's a very, very relevant one. And there's no doubt that body-worn video and the retention of imagery and records will be a more complex business than that for drones in terms of its use and its far more widespread rollout, and therefore its contact with the public in a whole host of different scenarios and situations. So the retention of it, the guards around that, the parameters, the legislation, the use, the policies that underpin it are really, really important and must be well understood and articulated. We have the benefit, of course, of looking elsewhere in the UK, because many forces operate body-worn videos with a number of different applications and software support mechanisms to enable that evidence to be retained in a safe, secure way, but equally in a way which can be shared and disclosed as appropriate with prosecution and defence. And we would obviously seek to learn lessons from the exposure that other organisations and police organisations have had. However, in terms of the detail of that and any specific software or digital framework that may be put in place, I would hand to Matt in case he has any more detail than I do.
I wonder, ACC, time's not with us, unfortunately. I wonder if that's something that you can include in your written response with other matters. The committee would be very interested to receive that. And I know you wish to very briefly, please clarify an earlier point that was raised with you.
Yes, if I may, Mr MacArthur asked about the discrepancy in flying hours, 426 versus the smaller number. Just to clarify, that's based on time frame. The smaller number was purely over the evaluation period of May 19 to November 20. The higher number was for the total flying time since we took possession of the drones, and that includes all of our user acceptance and training as well. So quite an additional number of hours on top of that second total, which was purely within the parameters of the evaluation period.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, ACC, for that clarification. And that completes our questions panel and concludes our evidence session. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank all three of you for the comprehensive way that you've engaged with the committee to provide that evidence. Thank you very much indeed for that. And that concludes the public part of today's meeting. The next meeting of the subcommittee will be on Monday, 15 February, when we will take evidence from the Cabinet Secretary for Justice on the Scottish Government's response to Dame Eilish Angelini's final report on police complaints handling. In the meantime, any follow-up scrutiny issues will be dealt with by way of correspondence, which, as ever, will be published on our website. As previously agreed, I will now move the meeting into private session. Thank you very much.